All right, if y'all are ready, we'll get started. We're going to turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 17, please. 2 Chronicles 17. So this has been one of the most difficult sections to figure out exactly which order to cover everything in, because we are actually introduced to the King Jehoshaphat that we're going to talk about a good bit today before we're given his official introduction in 2 Kings. And mostly that's because he reigns at the same time that Ahab, king in the north, does. And there's just a lot to tell about the interactions between Ahab and Elijah. So we're introduced to Ahab at the end of chapter 16, and really we don't leave the story with him and Elijah until the end of, almost the very end of 22. At the very end of Ahab's life, we have the interaction between him and Jehoshaphat in their war that we talked about, I guess it was last time. Seems like 6 months ago. But whenever we talked last time, we talked about the battle that they had in Ramoth Gilead with the king of Syria or Aram. Ramoth Gilead, it's hard to see on this map, but it's right here. And basically the battle was over. Maybe there were some agreements about cities being handed back over to Israel, and that didn't happen. And Ahab and Jehoshaphat worked together in that. And what happens to Ahab? He dies because this was not approved of the Lord. Micaiah the prophet told us that. But he goes anyway. Now Jehoshaphat is with him. He survives the battle, but it was not something that God was pleased with. That's chapter 18 of Chronicles. But when we come to Chronicles, we're going to look at, that's of 2 Chronicles. We're going to look at chapter 17, which introduces us to Jehoshaphat. We'll skip 18 because we've already talked about that account with Ahab and that war that they go to. And then in 19 and 20, we get some more on Jehoshaphat and some wars. That sound all right? That sounds like, okay, make sure I'm on the same page. So why don't we just go to chapter 17? And really this all basically is at the very end of 2 Kings 21 through 50 is chapter 17. And then what we are going to look at in chapters 19 and 20 of Chronicles really doesn't show up in Kings at all. Maybe just barely mentioned, but certainly not the details of it for sure. Okay, anything you want to say by way of introduction or anything else? Okay, so let's go to 2 Chronicles 17. Now, who was Jehoshaphat's father? Asa. Very good. Now, as far as kings go, how would we qualify Asa? Pretty good. Yes, at the very end, there's some questionable activity, but overall, he is a good king. And Jehoshaphat, his son, this is verse 1 of chapter 17, reigned in his place and strengthened himself against Israel. He placed forces in all the fortified cities of Judah and set garrisons in the land of Judah and the cities of Ephraim that Asa his father had captured. The Lord was with Jehoshaphat because he walked in the earlier ways of his father David. He did not seek the Baals, but sought the God of his father and walked in his commandments and not according to the practices of Israel. Therefore the Lord established the kingdom in his hand. And all Judah brought tribute to Jehoshaphat, and he had great riches and honor. His heart was very courageous in the ways of the Lord. And furthermore, he took the high places in the ashram out of Judah. One thing that I would say is when you put this together with the reign of Asa, this period of time here, 41 years and then 25 years of Jehoshaphat, and of course there's overlap with Jehoshaphat will overlap with Asa a little bit and with his son Jehoram a little bit. But this is one of the longest periods of time in Judah's history where we will have consistent faithfulness. You might look at maybe the reign of David and then the beginning of Solomon might have been a comparative time, but really you have almost the entire reigns of Asa and Jehoshaphat are being characterized as good reigns. You notice that Jehoshaphat not only is he's not seeking the idols, he is seeking the Lord, right? So he doesn't just get the benefit, the quality of he's not going after the idols, but he's actually directing himself towards Yahweh, towards the Lord God. And so God is going to establish him, he's going to protect him, he's going to enrich him in many ways. Okay, anything through verse 6?
I like that there where he says his heart was courageous in the ways of
Yes,
the Lord.
very good.
He was not afraid to remove the bad influences and like the previous kings were. And we're going to see some other things that he was not afraid to do.
That's right. Very good. So you notice in verses 7 and following that he's going to have his officials. There are some that are just, I think, of his household maybe, or just connected with the kingship. Then there are Levites, and then there are priests that are established, and we don't necessarily have to read all those names. You're welcome to read them on your own, or out loud if anybody wants to volunteer. But in verse 9, they taught in Judah, having the book of the law of the Lord with them. They went through all the cities of Judah and taught among the people. I think we see here one place. There are other places, but not as many as we would like. But here is a place where the Levites and the priests and the officials of the king seem to take on themselves, or Jehoshaphat installs them with this responsibility as well. They have been given this responsibility by God to go and actually go through the communities and teach the law of the Lord. There are some times, and I think maybe Asa's reign was something like this, and maybe other kings' reign, where the king may be a good guy, but we don't have all of this effort to get that out to the people. When we come to the days of Ezra, for example, in the period of the return and rebuilding, we're going to see the Levites really take this role on. You remember that Ezra will be up and he'll be reading the law of the Lord before the people, and the Levites will be kind of circulating among them, helping give a sense of the reading. I think we really see the Levites take on this role big time when they come back from captivity. Well, we see it previewed already here. We see that groundwork being laid. And I think that was exactly what the Levites and the priests were supposed to do. When you look at like Leviticus 10, they were taught to tell the people, this is after Nadab and Abihu, they were to teach the people the distinctions between holy and unholy, clean and unclean. That's one thing I think that they would be doing here, working in that way. Anything else you'd like to say about those that are installed?
Yeah, well, I think about our times. You know, I don't know if they had schools. They were going out and teaching, but I wrote down that God in the Bible was not removed from schools. It was encouraged.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if it was that way now?
Mm-hmm.
You know, at one time I believe it was in this country. But
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, you almost see, a localism here in a way that you don't always see. You know, they could always come to Jerusalem, and I'm sure they could always find somebody teaching in Jerusalem. But Jehoshaphat taking the responsibility and saying, we're going to send people out into those towns and communities and try to encourage and teach them, I think is good. And I think we'll see it maybe develop even more in the silence period in synagogues and things like that, where you'll have people of this class that are out there trying to teach. But this is a good moment as you're not only clearing away the idols, you're not only as the king saying, I'm going to follow God, you're saying, as a people, we're going to follow God, and you're sending teachers out to make that possible. Not maybe in some ways just making the demand, but also sending the officials and the Levites and the priests out who can instruct people in the book of the law, right? Not just some random instruction, but they've got the book of the law handy, and they're going to take it with them. Okay. Anything else?
I do have also, I also have written down that there was no separation of church and state.
Yes, that's right.
You know, the government, they're upholding God's law.
That's right.
And
yes.
there, you know.
Yeah, and if they'll take my sermons and go teach them in schools, I'll be fine with it. Or Lonnie's. But if they take other people's, that's when. You see, we would face a greater challenge in some ways without the separation of church and state, because who knows which person with the Bible goes into those places, you know. But I understand exactly what you're saying is, if we could take it on ourselves to say we're going to try to reach people in that way, and if we had an authority who was a scripturally minded person and says, let's just teach the Bible or something like that, that would be helpful. But, you know, there are times, so when we lived in Mississippi, every student took a Bible class. I think you could take it as an elective, but basically every student did. Well, who taught it? Well, one of the local denominational leaders. And there were times where some of the local church members' kids would come to services, and I'd say, man, I wish I believed more in the separation of church and state, because it'd just be better let's just leave that to mom and dad to teach, and don't impose it on our kids in the school. But that happened in Israel too when there were bad teachers who were being sent out. This is an occasion where there are good men being sent out and taking responsibility for this.
I was just talking about you didn't have the government saying
yes.
No.
That's right. That's right. Yes. You're exactly right. And, maybe we still have a little bit of a buffer here, but it won't be long before that buffer's gone. And we maybe we have more wiggle room than most places do, but it won't be long till we don't have any. Okay, everybody good through verse 9? Any thoughts, comments? Okay, now notice this, verse 10, the fear of the Lord fell upon the kingdoms of the lands that were around Judah, and they made no war against Jehoshaphat. Now that's going to be for a period of time. It won't be forever, but there is going to be a period of protection for Jehoshaphat. Some of the Philistines brought Jehoshaphat presents and silver for tribute, and the Arabians also brought him 7,700 rams and 7,700 goats. And Jehoshaphat grew steadily greater. He built in Judah fortresses and store cities. He had large supplies in the cities of Judah. He had soldiers, mighty men of valor in Jerusalem. This was the muster of them by their fathers' houses. Of Judah, the commanders of the thousands, Adon the commander were 300,000 men of mighty men of valor. And next to him, Jehohanan, the commander, with 280,000. And next to him, Amasiah, the son of Zikri, a volunteer for the service of the Lord, with 200,000 mighty men of valor. Of Benjamin, Eliada, a mighty man of valor, with 200,000 men armed with bow and shield. And next to him, Jehozabad, with 180,000 armed for war. These were in the service of the king, besides those whom the king had placed in the fortified cities throughout all Judah. So you can see that Jehoshaphat's faithfulness spiritually is leading to stability militarily, physically, economically, geopolitically, however you want to describe that. And if you add up all the men here, we're talking about more than 1 million men, and it's like double what Asa had, right? So, and I think that's what you've got. I think you've got the chronicler reminding us that he's building on the good that Asa had been doing. What Asa had done was great. Jehoshaphat takes it even further in goodness and development. Anything?
Proverbs 14:34, righteousness exalteth the nation, and sin is a reproach to any people.
Yes.
We can see that right there.
Yes, sir. And especially when they're tied in this covenant like that with the Lord. And you really see that there are eras in Judah and Israel's history where they do all right when they're not serving the Lord. But it won't last long because God's using it as a time to bring them back. But you don't see many times where they're being faithful and things aren't going well. Right? You know what I mean? Like, it's the Lord really tries to demonstrate, I think. Doesn't try, he's the Lord. So he does demonstrate that faithfulness to him in this covenant era when physical blessings are so closely tied into that covenant, he's going to keep his word in that. And so we see that. Now, I think the one major problem of Jehoshaphat is his alliance with Ahab in the north, with the Ahab family. It's really kind of astounding when you think about how awful we have Ahab described, how awful we have Jezebel described, and how well we have Jehoshaphat described. Then we have the war that we talked about last time, and we talked about the war where Ahab is fighting against the Syrians. But we're not going to talk about that very much. Ahab dies in that battle. But in chapter 19, there is going to be really in chapter 20, there's going to be some conflict that Jehoshaphat's going to have to face. But before we do that, maybe we should look at chapter 19. You want to take us through that? So we're skipping 18. Everybody's with us, though. That's the same thing as what we covered in 2 Kings last time we were together. Sorry for the confusion on that if there is, but it's got two stories going at one time.
He just can't get over making these alliances.
Yes, that's right. That's what we're going to keep seeing is Jehoshaphat is like, he's one of those guys that's a good guy, and he's like, I think I can work with him. I think I can make it happen, over and over and over and over. And it doesn't make it look like he abdicates his doing right, but it will cost his family tragically. We're going to see that more as we go through the narrative. Okay, you want to take us through 19 to whatever degree you want to?
Okay. Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned in safety to his house in Jerusalem. But Jehu, the son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, Should you help the wicked and love those who hate the Lord? Because of this, this wrath has gone out against you from the Lord. Nevertheless, some good is found in you, for you destroyed the Asheroth out of the land and have set your heart to seek God. Jehoshaphat lived at Jerusalem, and he went out again among the people from Beersheba to the hill country of Ephraim and brought them back to the Lord, the God of their fathers. We can stop right there. We already mentioned, where they went out into that battle, and this is where he comes back from that battle, back to Jerusalem. The battle where the 400 prophets and all that took place. Let me find the place here. It says he returned in safety. How is it that he returned in safety back to Jerusalem?
Had to have been protected by the Lord.
Protected by the Lord. As opposed to being killed by a random arrow.
Yeah. Ahab didn't have that protection.
Yeah. So Jehu asked him, why did you help those who are wicked? Why do you love those who hate the Lord? Ahab he enticed Jehoshaphat to go with him. And I'd like to read a verse here, Proverbs 1. Verses 10 through 19. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods, we shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird. But these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set in ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors. Seems like Jehoshaphat would have heeded that. But he just couldn't, like I said earlier, he just couldn't get over it. I'm looking for he's rebuked for joining up with Ahab right there for sure. And he's going to be rebuked later for joining with Ahaziah. I don't know why I wrote this down. I don't want to go back to Ahab, but you remember some things about Ahab. Did he have anger issues? Do you think he had anger issues? Well, I have another verse that I wanted to read about that in Proverbs 22, 24, and 25. Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. So there's another thing that Jehoshaphat should have heeded to right there. I believe he knew about Ahab's anger problem.
Yeah.
But Jehoshaphat, he's commended for the good that he does. God knows his heart, and he knows that Jehoshaphat seeks him. And we read about the many good. We've seen a lot of good God-fearing, God-seeking men that make mistakes. We Abraham and David and others, but they have one thing in common: they turn back to God always, and I believe that's what we see in Jehoshaphat right here. rather than just turn away from God, forsake God.
Yeah, because his work is going to continue when he comes back.
Oh, yeah, he's going to turn it up a little bit.
That's right.
Seems like.
Yeah, it's almost as if. So just noticing verses 5 through 7 or so here. So he comes back. So Mr. Timmy read for us. He brought them back to the Lord, the God of their fathers, verse 4. Then he appoints judges, and notice how he instructs them. Consider what you do, the end of verse 6. For you judge not for man, but for the Lord. He is with you in giving judgment. Now then let the fear of the Lord be upon you. Be careful what you do, for there's no injustice with the Lord our God, or partiality, or taking bribes. So Jehoshaphat, even as he instructs and appoints these men in their roles, says, understand that you're not doing this for me. You're not doing this for some other man. You're doing this for the Lord. This is how God's going to carry out his judgment. And so act like he would as you carry that out. Now, that's a high standard, but what he's saying is don't make decisions based on earthly balanced budgets or something like that. Make it based on righteousness and justice and what's fair and what's proper, because that's the way that God acts. No injustice, no partiality, no taking bribes. Then also notice he puts Levites, priests, heads of family in Israel. This is in verse 8, to give judgment for the Lord. And he charged them, verse 9, thus you shall do in the fear of the Lord in faithfulness and with your whole heart. Whenever a case comes to you from your brothers who live in your cities concerning bloodshed, law or commandment, statutes or rules, and you shall warn them that they may not incur guilt before the Lord, and wrath may not come upon you and your brothers. Thus you shall do, and you will not incur guilt. And behold, Amariah, the chief priest, is over you in all matters of the Lord. And Zebediah, the son of Ishmael, the governor of the house of Judah, in all the king's matters, and the Levites will serve you as officers. Deal courageously, and may the Lord be with the upright. I wonder if that distinction between Amariah, the priest, and Zebediah, the son of Ishmael, who's over the house of Judah, if this is not in between what we would think of as maybe more religious matters and then more like political matters, so that you've got men who are separated in those offices. Who's going to be the person in the position to make the religious decisions? Well, Amariah, the chief priest, is in the better position for that. And then you've got a representative of the tribe of Judah who is going to be the king's right-hand man in making some of those legal decisions. So these judges, they have overseers over them. One of them, a priest from the tribe of Levi, appointed as the chief priest to help oversee that. And on the other side, one from the tribe of Judah. I think that as we look at Chronicles, even more than when we look at Kings, we see Levi and Judah come very prominently to the front here. That was very important as they're coming back from captivity. So they're reading about the history of God's dealings through Judah and Levi here. Important to have those people in those offices moving forward.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how good your laws are if you don't have the right people.
That's right. Who have the right commitment. As he says in verse 9, in the fear of the Lord, in faithfulness, with your whole heart. It's like you can have the law book right in front of you, but if you've got a judge who's not committed to it with his whole heart, then what do you do?
Basically, he's being sure that there's no Canaanite people
Yes.
in those positions.
That's good.
Seems like.
Mm-hmm. Okay, any thoughts from anybody through chapter 19? Any question, and it can be related to the Ahab interaction or anything like that. Next time, I don't have it now. I have it, but not on this slide. I'll show a family tree, how Ahab and Jehoshaphat's family ends up tying in together. It won't matter now, particularly in today's account, but it will matter pretty quickly because Jehoram, Jehoshaphat's son, will be married to Ahab and Jezebel's daughter, Athaliah. So it'll be Jehoram and Athaliah, which will make for a horrific marriage. Then Jehoram will die, and Athaliah will take over, and she will be just as bad as it gets in Judah.
So when does that happen? Because here he seems like he's trying to make correction. So has it already happened?
I would say that, so at the end of 20, it talks about he joined with Ahaziah, king of Israel, who acted wickedly. It doesn't talk about the marriage there, but I think that's probably at the same juncture. We'll see more of that as we go.
So he's still making some of the same errors.
Yes, I think we may have a period of time of better decision making, But, it's kind of hard to tell exactly because Ahaziah, doesn't reign that long. But Jehoshaphat, well, let me go back here. So you see Ahaziah is here. He didn't reign that long. Jehoshaphat will reign for 5 more years after Ahab dies. So anyway, there's just a little while where they overlap at all. But it does look like a Jehoshaphat alliance, at least a closeness. Now, it really could be Ahaziah. It really could be that Jehoram just kind of makes that alliance as they go. But Jehoshaphat and Jehoram kind of overlap at the end. But I think it's just a relationship that had been built by Jehoshaphat, even if he was the one who, pulled the trigger on that or not. I don't know. I can't remember a passage that spells that out one way or the other.
It's hard. Like I think about the parents, like decisions you're making right now, you're at, and then something happens when your kids go in a direction you don't expect. You can't go and do what you did.
Right.
And I wonder if that's kind of what I would just
like building those relationships.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah. You would suppose that Jehoram has some say in this. Maybe, I don't know. But whether he does or does not, the fact that somebody in that line was like, you know what, Ahab and Jezebel's daughter will be a good option. Just wasn't thinking clearly. And Jehoram won't be a good king on his own, but he's not helped at all. Okay.
I want to say one more thing there in verse 3 when Jehoshaphat is being commended there, he says, he have set your heart to seek God. How do you do that? How do we do that? How do you set your heart to seek God? You want to answer that? I have an answer.
Well, he does. I would say there's 2 things. One, he's making an effort to remove things that would keep him from serving the Lord. So removing idols. But in our own lives, that would be removing, things that are leading us away from the Lord. But also, he makes a very diligent effort to know what God's will is and to follow that.
Okay, well, I'll just read you the verse then. Put off the old man and put on the new.
There you go.
New, being renewed in knowledge after the image of the Creator.
Mm-hmm. It's some negative and some positive. Putting away some things and buying into some things. That's good. All right, so let's make our way to chapter 20. So Jehoshaphat looks like for a long time he has a lot of peace, but there will be a period where some of these area kingdoms are going to come against him in battle. So in verse 1, you have the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Meunites. Does anybody say anything other than Meunites in verse 1? If you'll notice, there's some other places where they were referred to as, in verse 10, notice this, and now behold the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir. I think those are probably supposed to be parallel terms. And if that's true, then that would be the kingdom of Edom. Maybe the Meunites is another name for them or something like that. Because Mount Seir was the key mountain, one of the key mountains in Edom. And so that would kind of line up with that. And I think we may see them referenced again at some point. You see Mount Seir referenced a couple more times through the chapter. So that's who I think we're talking about when we talk about the Meunites, are probably the Edomites or somebody closely connected to them. So Edom would be descendants of... So Ammon and Moab both are descendants of Lot. Edom would be descendants of Esau, of course, but they would all be relatively close located. Yeah, so notice this in verse 2, a great multitude is coming against you from Edom. Right, so it looks like there's an Edom, Moab, Ammon alliance. All of these folks here allying against Jehoshaphat. Now, what is Jehoshaphat's reaction? Look at verse 3. He's afraid, but he seeks the Lord. Well, that's right. I don't think that the problem here is Jehoshaphat's fear. The problem would be fear and then resorting to bad actions in view of that fear, right? Say, well, I better call on Baal right quick, or I better call on Molech right quick, or something like that, some false god. Well, that's not what it is. He is afraid. And maybe on his own he should have been. But he seeks the Lord. And when he seeks the Lord, he proclaims a fast. And Judah assembled to seek help from the Lord. And from all the cities of Judah, they came to seek the Lord. I think you have it repeated 3 times. They're seeking the Lord. If you're going to be afraid, that's the right direction to turn. And Jehoshaphat's prayer actually is a beautiful prayer. I think we would probably call it a lament prayer. A prayer of sadness and almost feeling of abandonment. And we've got just a minute. Is it all right? I'll just take the time and read the prayer. So this is verse 6. He stands before the new court, verse 5, and said, O Lord God of our fathers, are you not God in heaven? You rule over all the kingdoms of the nations. In your hand are power and might, so that none is able to withstand you. Did you not, our God, drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it forever to the descendants of Abraham, your friend? And they have lived in it, and have built for you in it a sanctuary for your name, saying, if disaster comes upon us, the sword, judgment, or pestilence, or famine, we will stand before this house and before you, for your name is in this house, and cry out to you in our affliction, and you will hear and save. Now that's positive praise. He doesn't express any doubt in who God is or what He can do to enemies. Now verse 10. And now behold, the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, whom you would not let Israel invade when they came from the land of Egypt, and whom they avoided and did not destroy, behold, they reward us by coming to drive us out of your possession, which you gave us to inherit. O our God, will you not execute judgment on them? For we are powerless against this great horde that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are set on you. But our eyes are on you. I love that prayer. I think Jehoshaphat doesn't have the answer. I think we can read Psalms like that, where the psalmist basically is like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why you're allowing me to suffer all this. Psalm 88, I think, is probably the key example. He never comes to some resolution. He's just distraught, doesn't know why all this bad stuff is happening. I think Jehoshaphat is in that situation. Why are we letting this happen? Why are they doing this? We were gracious to them by your commandment. We didn't do this to them. And I love that last line. You know, we love Colossians 3:17. Whatever you do in word or in deed, do all in the name of the Lord. Maybe we need this one cross-stitched on our pillows. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. That's it. That's our claim to. That's what we're trying to say when we talk about Bible authority, isn't it? I don't know what to do. I'm just trying to do what you would have me do. And I think Jehoshaphat, of course, he's in a very different situation. He's about to face war against Ammon, Moab, and Edom. You know, very different situation than I've ever had to face, at least so far. But he says, I don't know the next step to take, but I'm trusting you. I'm going to listen to you. I'll do what you say. And I think that's a beautiful prayer. Trusting God's power. Says, I don't understand the situation, but I'm ready for what you would have instruct me to do. Anything through that prayer? I think it's about as good a prayer as we see one of the kings pray.
Yeah, that may be where the phrase we get, our Father who art in heaven.
Oh, yes.
At the very beginning of it.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing about that, our eyes are on you. That means before the trouble came,
yeah,
their eyes were on
Mm-hmm.
Lord. You know, don't wait on trouble to set your eyes on the Lord.
That's right. So he is in a moment, and I think we see this sometimes in Scripture, and sometimes maybe it's hard for me to wrestle with as a Bible student. We see these moments where it's like, is that person doubting the Lord? I don't think he's doubting the Lord. I think he's not sure about what the Lord is doing. I think he doesn't know the answer to the situation that's right in front of him. I think this is an example of a time where it's all right for us to have questions, even concerns or misunderstandings, but he doesn't let go in face of that. And I think that's helpful. You know, sometimes we have young folks who, as they're developing, they have questions they can't answer. Why would God allow this? Why would God do this? And they just walk out with all those questions. I would say, bring the questions. Let's wrestle with the questions. But for Jehoshaphat, the questions he can't answer are not enough to overwhelm the questions he can answer. Right? God's faithfulness all along has been. And that's what I would say is, hey, I may never be able to help you come to a perfect resolution of the answer to that question. But there are things that we can know for sure that we're going to hold on to, and then we can work through that. And so Jehoshaphat will get some direct, inspired information that will help him work through these answers. But I just love that attitude of not having all the answers in his pocket and still saying, it's kind of like this. When Jesus turns to Peter and the other disciples, when all the crowds are walking away, and Jesus says, Peter, you're going to walk away too? Other disciples. And I don't know if they understood what Jesus meant about eating his flesh and drinking his blood any more than the crowds did. But he says, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. And we have believed and come to know that you're the Holy One of God. I think that's similar to what Jehoshaphat is saying. Well, I don't know what's going on here, but who else am I going to go to? Baal's not going to help me any. Molech's not going to help me any. Only the Lord will. So we've got our eyes on you. So then, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah. This is verse 14. Verse 15, and he said, listen, all Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem and King Jehoshaphat, thus says the Lord to you, do not be afraid and do not be dismayed at this great horde, for the battle is not yours but God's. Tomorrow go down against them. Behold, they will come up by the ascent of Ziz. You will find them at the end of the valley, east of the wilderness of Jeruel. You will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf, O Judah and Jerusalem. Do not be afraid and do not be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, and the Lord will be with you. That is quite the promise, isn't it? That you're going to go out against them, but you won't even have to fight. You're going to watch and see what the Lord does. It reminds me, and somebody else drew this parallel to Moses at the Red Sea when the people are crying out and saying, really they're in a much more, I would say, unfaithful mode than Jehoshaphat and the rest of the people are here. But remember what Moses says, don't fear, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. Yahweh will fight for you and you will keep silent. I think it's a very similar moment right here. Jehoshaphat is going to have his own experience of an Exodus moment, where he just stands and sees what the Lord accomplishes on his behalf. He trusted in the Lord. He confided in him. He's relying on him. He's looking at him and depending on him. And God says, I will fight for you. I'll take care of the situation. Anything else through verse 17? What would you like to say there?
So they didn't have to do anything.
Well, they have to go down. So then you have verse 18. Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell down before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. And the Levites of the Kohathites and the Korahites stood up to praise the Lord, the God of Israel, with a very loud voice. It's interesting. They haven't seen the result yet. And this is their response already, is gratitude and praise. That's right. So this is verse 20. Hear me, Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. There in the middle of verse 20. Believe in the Lord your God, and you will be established. Believe his prophets, and you will succeed. And when he had taken counsel with the people, he appointed those who were to sing to the Lord and praise him in holy attire, as they went before the army and say, give thanks to the Lord, for his steadfast love endures forever. And when they began to sing and praise, the Lord set an ambush against the men of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, who had come out against Judah, so that they were routed. For the men of Ammon and Moab rose against the inhabitants of Mount Seir, devoting them to destruction. And when they had made an end of the inhabitants of Seir, they all helped destroy one another. They just consume themselves. The Lord turns them on one another. And so you say, so they don't have to do anything. Well, kind of they do. They have to trust God. They have to believe it. But they don't have to do much of the fighting, the real fighting, Okay. Anything else through 23?
Well, the singing is pretty important.
Yes, it is.
As they go out singing. I suppose that had a little to do with that. Just, it seems like it's pretty important.
You mean the response, God's response to it? Yeah, and you have this, give thanks to the Lord for his steadfast love endures forever, repeated in some of the Psalms and stuff. And it connects us, and I think it would be worth us singing some if we have songs that say that, because what it does, I think about Romans 15 verse 4, that the things that were written of old were written for our learning, that we through the perseverance and encouragement of the Scriptures might have hope. I think the lesson in Romans 15 is one of the great things we get from reading the Old Testament is promises being fulfilled and God's faithfulness being evident over and over and over and over and over again. So how do I know God's going to be faithful the next time? because he was to Jehoshaphat, and he was all the 100 other times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times before that. And so we have this phrase repeated a lot. And maybe this is a case where we don't normally think about God's salvation, but we certainly should.
Seems like the battle's over before they even get there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, it'll be very similar when we get to Hezekiah, when the Assyrians are surrounding Jerusalem. And it looks like Judah is going to fall just like Israel fell. And Hezekiah prays, maybe an even more beautiful prayer than Jehoshaphat's prayer. And there, remember, it's 185,000 be killed overnight. It's very similar to what's happening here. It's dependence on the Lord, and God will protect them and take care of them. Okay, so looking at these last, the middle of chapter 20, they see this. They see the dead bodies. They see all of this calamity that has fallen on this alliance against them. And they're going to go and they're going to be able to take spoils from the armies that they didn't have to go fight against. And this is verse 29. And the fear of the Lord came on all the kingdoms of the countries when they heard that the Lord had fought against the enemies of Israel. So the realm of Jehoshaphat was quiet, for his God gave him rest all around. It's interesting, you know, we had that message or that note about Jehoshaphat having peace. And even in this moment of what we might think of as warfare, it's not much on Jehoshaphat's part of warfare. You know, it's certainly peacetime for him and for his dealings. Now there are some high places. Now notice this in verse 31. This is kind of a summary. Reigned over Judah, 35 years old when began to reign. Reigned 25 years. His mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shili. He walked in the way of Asa, his father, and did not turn aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of the Lord. The high places, however, were not taken away. The people had not set their hearts upon the God of their fathers. Now, there were some high places that were taken away, right? But not all of them, because the people are not all devoted to the Lord yet either. Rest of the Acts recorded in the book of the Kings of Israel. After this, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, joined with Ahaziah, king of Israel, who acted wickedly. He joined him in building ships to go to Tarshish, and they built the ships in Ezion-Geber. And Eleazar, the son of Dodavahu of Marisha, prophesied against Jehoshaphat, saying, because you have joined with Ahaziah, the Lord will destroy what you have made. And the ships were wrecked and were not able to go to Tarshish. So we have that reported for us in 2 Kings, but I think we have more details going on here, because I don't know that we have as much about the alliance in 2 Kings as we do here. But now we see why they crash, why they don't make it, is because they're in partnership with the king of Israel, Ahaziah, who God doesn't want Jehoshaphat having anything to do with. So that partnership ends up being detrimental to this plan. Solomon did something similar, having sailing ships like this. Well, this is not going to be as successful as what Solomon set out to do because it's in a bad partnership. All right. Anything else through chapter 20?
Maybe this is a warning for people today about joining in business relationships.
Yeah.
That was a business relationship there, building the
Yeah,
ships.
I think it would be an indication of being careful about associations all across the board. You know, sometimes we look at passages like not being unequally yoked. But what I would say about those is, in these situations, the wicked have such influence on us. We don't want to tie ourselves into situations where that might influence us as best as possible. I don't know that it means we have to cut off relationships with the world, like 1 Corinthians 5 would say. But I would say here is Ahaziah, who claims to be a king of Israel and claims to have some connection to the Lord, I'm sure, and it's just going to be a mess. And all the kings of Israel, you know, you don't want to tie into that, these people making false claims to be God's people.
You always see, be careful about associations with those who are wicked because they'll influence you. I don't think you see anything anywhere, example of saying, join into those kind of relationships with people because you know that there's no guarantee that you'll have that positive influence on them.
Yeah.
It doesn't say, for instance, you marry someone that is not a Christian or whatever, because you will be able to get, it actually says the opposite. Be careful because they'll influence you.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is. I don't know
Well,
what we are. Or,
yeah. I would say that I think it's probably true that the New Testament, let me just say that. I think the New Testament assumes that the people that are being written to are in connection with and in relationship to people in the world, because they are obeying the gospel out of a world in which they already existed in, right? So you think about a Gentile obeying the gospel. Well, who are all his business associates going to be? Who is his spouse going to be? Well, with all likelihood, it's going to be somebody from a pagan background, right? So you see a lot, like I would think about 1 Peter as being you live in such a way so that they will see your good works. So there is some of that, but you have a lot of warnings about, yeah.
the warnings are always that.
Yeah.
Because,
Yes.
yeah,
That's right.
so,
That's right.
I mean, you can't.
And you know,
avoid the world,
yeah,
I'm saying, but
yeah.
be careful.
Avoid the connections that would pull you in that direction. That's right. Okay. And certainly that's the case for Jehoshaphat, who's already been warned about this specifically, right? Like, hey, you're tying in a bad way, and he goes right back to it, and then looks like he's even setting it up generationally for his son. Makes it even worse. All right, anything else on all that? We covered a lot, got through what we needed to. Basically, to be on schedule, we might be, just a little behind, but not much. And so what we'll try to do next time is look at really the end of 2 Kings and start into am I saying that right? Into 1 Kings and start into 2 Kings. I was like, after 2 Kings, what do we have? And kind of start into 2 Kings, and then so talk about Ahaziah, and then we'll transition to the end of Elijah, beginning of Elisha over the next few classes and things like that. Any comments or questions that you have? All right. Very good.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.